Today, we're not just looking at an old object from a museum. We are opening a cold case, a forensic investigation into a single, impossible artifact. It's an object that sat silently at the bottom of the sea for 2,000 years, encased in a shapeless lump of corroded bronze. And from the moment it was found, it began to systematically tear down everything we thought we knew about the ancient world. This is the story of the Antikythera Mechanism.
So here's our investigative roadmap. We'll start at the scene of the discovery, the shipwreck. Then we'll piece together gear by gear how this impossible machine actually worked. We'll build a profile of who could have built it, and then we're going to tackle the biggest mystery of all. How could a technology this advanced just vanish from the face of the Earth?
All right, let's begin. Our investigation starts not in a sterile lab, but at what I can only call a crime scene against our collective memory of the past. We're going to the bottom of the Aegean Sea. The year is 1900, and the place is a notoriously treacherous stretch of water off a tiny, rocky Greek island called Antikythera.
Picture it, the spring of 1900. A crew of Greek sponge divers led by a Captain Dimitrios Kontos gets caught in a violent storm. They're forced to take shelter near Antikythera. Once the storm breaks, one of the divers, a man named Elias Stadiatis, gears up to look for sponges. He's diving to a depth of 45 meters, that's about 150 feet, and the equipment they're using is terrifyingly basic. A heavy copper helmet sealed to a canvas suit with a simple hose pumping air from the surface. Down there, the pressure is crushing. The risk of nitrogen narcosis, a state of confusion that can be lethal, is incredibly high. Every single minute is a life-or-death gamble. While Stadiatis comes shooting back to the surface, but he doesn't have any sponges. He's in a state of absolute terror, raving about a field of rotting corpses and horses on the seabed. Captain Kontos, thinking the diver has lost his mind from the pressure, actually dives down himself to check. The corpses, of course, were not human. They were the scattered, ghostly remains of ancient bronze and marble statues. The very first piece of evidence they brought to the surface was a life-sized bronze arm, its hand still elegantly poised after 2 millennia in the dark.
As the divers recovered more of the cargo, it became clear this wasn't just some trading vessel. This was a treasure ship. We're talking magnificent bronze and marble statues, exquisite glassware, high-end pottery. This was a collection of luxury goods, likely looted or purchased in Greece, and on its way to an incredibly wealthy and powerful Roman patron. The shipwreck is dated to sometime between 160 BCE, a really critical moment in history when the Roman Republic was expanding and absorbing the rich cultural heritage of the Greek world. This ship was a snapshot of that very process.
But among all these spectacular, easily identifiable treasures, the divers brought up something else. It was just a lump, a calcified, corroded chunk of bronze about the size of a large book or a shoebox, completely unrecognizable. You have to imagine it sitting on the deck next to a stunning bronze statue of a philosopher. It looked like garbage, a piece of the ship's ballast maybe. It was taken along with the real treasures to the National Archaeological Museum in Athens, where it was cataloged and then, for 2 years, basically forgotten. It was a footnote. But that insignificant lump, as it turns out, was the single most important artifact ever recovered from the ancient world.
Okay, our investigation now moves from the chaos of the seafloor to the quiet, dusty halls of a museum in Athens. For 2 years, that lump of corroded bronze sat on a shelf, an anonymous piece of wreckage. But it held a secret, and it was about to break wide open.
The first real break in the case didn't come from some brilliant deduction. It came from a complete accident. On May 17, 1902, an archaeologist named Valerios Stias was examining the finds from the shipwreck. He noticed that the lump, as it dried out, had cracked and fallen apart. And when he looked inside the fractured, rock-like matrix, he saw it. Something that made no sense. It wasn't a coin, it wasn't part of a sculpture. It was the perfectly circular outline of a gear wheel, complete with tiny, sharp, triangular teeth. In that moment, the entire history of technology shuddered.
The reaction from the academic community was not excitement. It was immediate and profound skepticism. This find was an anachronism, an out-of-place artifact. Experts were convinced it had to be a mistake. Their best guess? It was probably part of a medieval clock that fell off a different ship centuries later and just happened to land on top of the ancient wreck. And you have to understand why they thought that. In 1902, the history of complex machines was well established. Precision gearing, the kind needed to build clocks and automatons, was an invention of the 14th century European Renaissance. The ancient Greeks were brilliant philosophers and geometers, sure, but a machine like this, it was considered utterly impossible. And what they had to work with was a nightmare of a puzzle. 82 separate, fragile fragments all caked in marine deposits. The device was made of bronze, which is a durable alloy, but 2,000 years in salt water had turned it brittle and incredibly vulnerable.
Now we get to the heart of our forensic deconstruction. To understand this impossible machine, we have to learn to speak its language. And it's not a language of words. It's the language of mathematics, encoded in bronze. It's the language of interlocking teeth and precise, meaningful ratios. We're going to examine the evidence, piece by piece, tooth by tooth.
So, the absolute key to unlocking this whole thing is the concept of a gear ratio. It's simple but brilliant. The number of teeth on any gear is not a random choice, it's a number with a specific job. If you mesh a gear with, say, 30 teeth to a gear with 10 teeth, the big gear turns once for every 3 turns of the small one. That's a 3-to-1 ratio. Now imagine if those numbers weren't 30 and 10, but were instead numbers that perfectly matched the cycles of the sun, the moon, and the planets. What the ancient engineers did here was translate the abstract mathematics of the cosmos directly into a physical, mechanical object.
Let's look at the hard evidence. Inside the fragments, researchers found a large gear, labeled B1, with exactly 223 teeth. Now, why that specific, odd number? Because ancient astronomers knew that 223 synodic months, that's the time from one new moon to the next, is the length of the Saros cycle. That's the period after which the geometry of the sun, earth, and moon repeats, which means the pattern of eclipses repeats. This gear is an eclipse predictor. Then they found a gear with 19 teeth. This represents the 19-year metonic cycle, a crucial discovery that allows you to line up the solar year with the lunar months. And then, just astonishingly, a gear with 127 teeth, which is a key part of the system that models the anomalistic month. That is, it accounts for the moon's changing speed as it orbits the Earth. These are not just cogs in a machine, they are chapters of astronomical knowledge written in bronze.
And here is where it goes from brilliant to flat-out genius. See, the moon doesn't travel at a constant speed in the sky. It speeds up and slows down because its orbit is not a perfect circle, it's an ellipse. Ancient astronomers, especially the great Hipparchus, knew this and they modeled it with a clever geometric idea called epicycles. But how do you build that? The makers of this device came up with an incredible solution, a pin and slot mechanism. Imagine 2 gears, but they don't mesh directly. The first gear has a small pin sticking out from its face, and the second gear has a slot cut into it. As the first gear turns, the pin moves back and forth inside the slot, causing the second gear to speed up and slow down with every single rotation. They had physically built the variable speed of the moon into the machine. It's a work of absolute genius.
So, how did it all work together? Well, the user would turn a single hand crank on the side of the box. That one simple motion started a cascade through a breathtakingly complex train of at least 30 interlocking gears. And these aren't crude, chunky gears. They are masterpieces of microengineering, with finely cut triangular teeth that are only about 1.6 millimeters apart. But the most shocking component of all is a differential gear. This is a device that can add or subtract the rotation of 2 different inputs. Here, it was used to subtract the sun's position from the moon's position to calculate and display the phase of the moon. A differential gear was thought to have been invented in the 16th century at the earliest, and yet here it is, quietly doing its job in a box from 100 BCE. All of this complex calculation was then displayed by a whole series of pointers on large dials on the front and back of the machine.
So we've taken a look at the engine. Now, let's reconstruct the dashboard. The front of the device was its main display. It wasn't just a clock or a calendar, it was a dynamic, working map of the entire cosmos as the ancient Greeks understood it.
The front dial was this beautiful system of concentric rings. The very outer ring was a 365-day calendar. Interestingly, it was based on the Egyptian solar calendar, which was much more stable than the messy Roman calendars of the day, and it could be adjusted for leap years. Inside that ring was one we're all familiar with, the 12 signs of the Greek zodiac. Moving across these rings were several pointers. One showed the exact position of the sun for any given day of the year. Another, moving independently and at that clever variable speed we talked about, showed the position of the moon. And this moon pointer had a gorgeous little feature, a small sphere, half painted black, half left silver, that rotated to show the exact phase of the moon. And what's more, faint inscriptions on the fragments strongly suggest that there were once pointers for the 5 planets known to the Greeks too. This thing was a complete, portable planetarium.
Okay, so if the front dial showed you the cosmos right now, the back dials were designed for something much more profound. They were designed to reveal the future. This is where the machine's creators turned bronze and gears into a tool for memory and prediction. It stopped being just a map of the heavens and became a kind of mechanical oracle.
The back of the machine was dominated by two large, intricate spiral dials. The upper spiral was a 5-turn track that mapped out the 235 months of the 19-year Metonic cycle. This was the master clock for any long-term calendar, the key to keeping lunar and solar time in sync. Below that was a 4-turn spiral that tracked the 223 months of the Saros cycle. And this one was all about predicting eclipses.
This lower dial really showcases the incredible predictive power of the device. It wasn't just a simple counter. It was a fully annotated forecast of the future. Next to the markings for specific months in the cycle, the creators inscribed tiny letters and symbols, glyphs, and these glyphs told the user everything, whether an eclipse was expected, whether it would be solar or lunar, and in some cases even the hour of the day it was predicted to occur. You could literally turn the crank into the future and watch as the machine told you when the sky would go dark. But the creators' obsession with precision didn't even stop there. They knew that the Saros cycle wasn't absolutely perfect. Each cycle is actually about 8 hours longer than a whole number of days. That means a repeating eclipse will happen about a third of the way around the world. To account for this, they added a small subsidiary dial inside the Saros spiral. This little dial tracked the exelogmus cycle, a period of 3 Saros cycles, or about 54 years, which brings the eclipse back to roughly the same time of day. It is an unbelievable level of detail and a profound testament to their desire to make their mechanical model of the universe as accurate as humanly possible.
So let's turn our attention now to the written evidence. You see, this incredibly complex machine actually came with its own user manual, but it wasn't written on a separate scroll of papyrus that would rot away. No, it was engraved directly onto the bronze plates and doors of the device itself, in tiny Greek letters just over a millimeter high.
Using advanced imaging techniques, we've been able to read these incredibly faint inscriptions. And they are not just simple labels like sun or moon. They're detailed paragraphs of technical instructions. For example, text on the back door explicitly describes how the Saros dial works, confirming that it encodes information about eclipse type. Even more amazing, some inscriptions seem to describe the predicted color of a future eclipse. This likely had astrological importance, tying the cold mechanics of the device to the rich belief systems of its time. All told, these engravings make up the most complex and dense technical Greek text ever found on any scientific instrument.
So what does all this writing tell us? Well, first, it proves this was a device for an expert user, someone already fluent in astronomy. Second, it confirms its function was for prediction and education, not just as a pre-display piece. And third, it gives us our single biggest clue about its origin. The names used for the months on the calendar aren't from Athens or Rhodes, the big intellectual centers. They're from Corinth and its colonies, a list that prominently includes the city of Syracuse in Sicily, the home of the greatest scientific mind of the ancient world, Archimedes.
Okay, we've taken the machine apart. We've read its instruction manual. Now our investigation turns to the most wanted person, or people, in ancient history. We need to build a profile of the creator. A mind, or more likely, a workshop of minds that possessed a combination of skills that, according to everything we used to know, simply should not have existed in the 2nd century BCE.
To build something like this, you need a perfect storm of expertise. First, you need a brilliant theoretical astronomer, someone who understands the complex cycles and anomalies of the heavens inside and out. Second, you need a master mechanical engineer, a craftsman who can turn those abstract mathematical theories into a working machine of precisely cut bronze gears. And third, you need a wealthy patron, someone to pay for the expensive materials, the workshop, and the years of labor. Finding all 3 of those things in one place at one time in the ancient world would have been incredibly rare.
The strongest astronomical evidence inside the machine points to the 2nd century BCE. The incredibly sophisticated model of the moon's variable motion is a near-perfect match for the theories of Hipparchus, who is arguably the greatest observational astronomer of antiquity. And where did Hipparchus do his work? On the island of Rhodes. At that time, Rhodes was a thriving hub of science, philosophy, and technology, a sort of ancient Silicon Valley. It's one of our prime suspects for where the mechanism was born.
But there's another trail of evidence, this one written. The famous Roman orator and statesman Cicero, writing in the 1st century BCE, describes 2 amazing machines that were built more than a century earlier by Archimedes of Syracuse. Cicero says these devices could perfectly model the motions of the sun, the moon, and the 5 planets, and get this, could even predict eclipses. For hundreds of years, historians just assumed Cicero was exaggerating, using a bit of rhetorical flair.
The Antikythera Mechanism proved he was being completely literal. This strongly suggests that our mechanism wasn't a one-of-a-kind freak of nature. It was the sole survivor of a lost tradition of building these incredible cosmic calculators.
And this brings us to what is, for me, the most profound and deeply unsettling question in this entire investigation. If a technology this sophisticated existed, why did it disappear? Why is there a gap, a great silence of more than 1,400 years before anything even remotely comparable shows up again in the historical record?
I think the answer lies in the crucial difference between two types of knowledge. You have textual knowledge, ideas written down in a book. A book can be copied, and as long as one copy survives, the idea survives. But then you have mechanical knowledge, the craft skills, the know-how to actually build something complex. That kind of knowledge can only be transmitted directly from a master to an apprentice, through years of hands-on practice. It's incredibly fragile. If that chain of teaching is ever broken, the knowledge doesn't just go dormant, it's extinguished.
The historical circumstances of the time created a perfect storm for this technology to be lost. The entire ecosystem that supported it, the Greek-led research centers, the wealthy patrons who funded pure science, was being disrupted and dismantled by the Roman conquest. And let's be honest, this device had no widespread practical use. It was a high-concept tool for philosophers and astronomers. Plus, the material itself, bronze, is valuable. In times of war or economic hardship, a beautiful machine like this is just a source of metal to be melted down for swords or coins. Finally, they must have been incredibly expensive and time-consuming to make, so there were probably never very many of them to begin with. The tradition was thin, fragile, and it broke.
Let's move now to the final phase of the forensic work. This is where, in the 21st century, brand new technologies allowed us to perform a kind of non-destructive autopsy on the fragments, letting us see deep inside the corroded layers without ever having to take them apart and risk destroying them.
Modern science gave us a whole new toolkit. First, high-energy X-ray tomography, basically an incredibly powerful medical CT scanner, allowed researchers to create a full 3D digital model of all 82 fragments. They could fly through the corrosion and see every hidden gear, counting each tooth. Then, a technique called polynomial texture mapping, which uses a dome of lights to capture every nuance of a surface, revealed faint inscriptions on the metal that were completely invisible to the naked eye. All of this data was then poured into powerful computational models, allowing scientists to build a working virtual replica of the mechanism and test how all the pieces, including the missing ones, would have fit together. This whole new approach was revolutionary. It allowed the research team to treat the mechanism not just as a pile of old parts, but as a bounded scientific text encoded in metal. That's a key idea. It means the machine has to make sense. It's a self-contained logical system. It's like having a complex Sudoku puzzle where many of the squares are missing. Because you know the rules of the puzzle, in this case, the laws of astronomy and mathematics, you can logically deduce what the missing pieces must have looked like for the whole thing to work.
And so we arrive at our final chapter, and the ultimate verdict in this century-long investigation. What is this object's true place in the grand story of human thought and invention?
First things first, can we call it a computer? Well, if we use the specific definition of an analog computer, the answer is an absolute, unequivocal yes. An analog computer solves problems by building a physical model of the mathematical relationships involved. This is precisely what the Antikythera Mechanism does. You give it an input, the turning of a crank to represent the flow of time, and it performs a massive calculation based on its physical structure and gives you a series of outputs. Its program isn't software. The program is the hardware itself, the very shape and number of its gears.
So how do we place it in the grand sweep of history? Is it viewpoint 1, the very first step on a long, straight road that leads directly to the laptop I'm talking to you on now? Or is it viewpoint 2, something else entirely, a unique and brilliant apex of a totally different kind of technological thinking, a tradition that rose to incredible heights and then just died out? The truth is, it's probably both. It certainly anticipates core principles that are fundamental to modern computing, but it exists within a worldview and a context that is profoundly ancient and in many ways lost to us.
What this object does, unequivocally, is shatter any simple, comforting, linear idea of technological progress. We like to think of history as a steady upward climb. The Antikythera Mechanism proves that's wrong. History is more like a rugged landscape, with incredible peaks of achievement that can be reached and then completely lost. The path gets erased, and future generations have to find their own way up a different mountain. It shows that technological genius can arise, flourish, and then completely vanish.
And that leaves us with the final and most unsettling implication of this entire investigation. This object survived by a 1 in a billion accident of history, a storm, a shipwreck, a chance discovery. It is an existence proof. It proves what the human mind was capable of 2,000 years ago, which forces us to ask the final chilling question. If this is the one that survived by pure luck, how many others didn't? How many other brilliant machines, other physical embodiments of lost knowledge are gone forever, melted down, burned, or still lying undiscovered in the dark? The Antikythera Mechanism doesn't just tell us about our past. It shows us the profound, terrifying blind spots in our memory of who we are.